always say people come for the impact, but they stick around for the community. And grassroots activism and volunteer activism can be challenging stuff to do. Sitting at a city council meeting for 2 hours waiting to give 3 minutes of testimony is not most people's idea of like a super fun Tuesday night. But if you're doing that with a group of people you care about, it becomes fun. So it should be fun and meaningful and about the relationship. So
true.
I love to
real.
hear that.
Yeah.
And that's really what we're all about, right? So we're a grassroots coastal and ocean conservation group. We've got 200 chapters and clubs across the U.S. These are volunteers in their communities trying to make a difference locally. Surfrider really provides a network to do that successfully, whether it's San Diego or Los Angeles or Coos Bay, Oregon or Florida. But then we can really scale that impact up from the local level to the state level and ultimately up to the federal level. So it's decentralized in its activities and centralized in sort of its impact, which I think is the magic of the model.
The climate conversation has never been more divided. As disruptors in this space, we're hungry to find solutions to the challenges our environment faces. Welcome to the Climate Rebels podcast. My name is Joel Caesar. I'm joined by Owen Barrett and Chris Pomerleau. We are experts in clean energy, net zero real estate, decarbonization, and entrepreneurship. We celebrate those who take action against the climate crisis and are striving to make the world a cleaner place. Thanks for joining the conversation. Now, let's get to work. Welcome to the Climate Rebels podcast. Joining me as always is Owen Barrett, the self-proclaimed Adam Newman of Green Building. We're lucky to have Chris Pomerleau, the real estate oracle of Omaha, back today. Today's guest was Chad Nelsen. He's the CEO of Surfrider Foundation and leads the world's largest grassroots network dedicated to the protection and enjoyment of the world's oceans, waves, and beaches through approaches that integrate coastal recreation with conservation. You'll hear it on the show. Chad's a hero of mine for a lot of reasons. I'm a big fan of the Surfrider Foundation and what they do. They look at the ocean as an opportunity to build more capacity around environmental issues. And my story is a perfect example. I went to the Los Angeles chapter years ago to volunteer and have made lifelong friends and developed programs that I started myself because they give you that freedom to innovate through their nonprofit. And I think, his message about how he started surfonomics is also a really powerful message of combining environmental conservation with economics. And man, when you can tell that story together, what an impact it can have. What do you guys think?
I love the surfonomics piece. I think we in sustainability need to figure out how to do a better job with exactly that. I think it's been tried, but it hasn't been as successful as Chad's been with surfonomics. So it's a good little tidbit there.
Yeah, I think that just the way he explained how, first off, that's just how cool is that he led the way on economics and surfing and that whole masters. And it's super interesting how he did that, but how the economy is affected by the people that actually love to enjoy the planet, the surfing, the ocean, and how you can positively affect the environment through partaking in those activities and those volunteer opportunities. I just think that was really motivating. So he was awesome to have on the show.
Yeah, no doubt. But before we get into all that with Chad, let's dive into a segment we're stealing from the All In podcast called Science Corner. So on the All In podcast, they punted to David Freeberg, who likes to break down hot topics around business and really understand the science behind it. So we're going to do the same with the concept of net zero energy buildings. So our company, Raven, is out there promoting the idea that you can invest with us. We'll buy the building and we're going to convert it to net zero. And a lot of people do know what that means. It's a growing term in the world of real estate or sustainability or pretty much anything. We hope it's in the vernacular of the general public, but we also get a lot of feedback from potential investors, existing investors, people who follow us on social media. What do you mean by net zero? What does it mean? Or even challenging our version of net zero. So, Owen, I asked you to get prepared to run Science Corner. So tell us, what's net zero?
Well, I think before we explain what net zero buildings are, it's important for the audience to understand why they're important. So climate change is caused by humans burning fossil fuels, which release greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. 10 years ago, I would take the time to explain that concept more, but it's 2023. if people in the audience don't believe that that's driving climate change, I suggest they put their tin hats back on and keep trying to prove that the earth is flat. So if we're all in agreement that
I keep telling you not to be mean, but go ahead.
come on, like we can't keep debating whether or not burning
All right.
fossil fuels causes
Climate
climate
change is real, and we got to solve it now. What net zero?
So, all right, so we're in agreement there. So now it's important to understand kind of this pie chart of greenhouse gases. 40% comes from buildings. So buildings are the biggest problem. They're the biggest piece of the pie chart. They're a bigger problem than transportation and agriculture. And a lot of people don't realize that. Yeah, biggest opportunity too. And so a net zero building is one that over the course of a year generates as much clean energy on site as is consumed by the building. And so most of them focus on energy efficiency first, so that you need as little renewable energy as possible. But what I thought was most interesting about we're in the business of net zero buildings, so I didn't have to do a ton of research, but I did do a little. Not a single definition that I found mentioned carbon offsets. Not one. They all talk about having energy produced on site via renewables to cover the energy consumption that they have. Yet in our industry, real estate, pretty much every building that's net zero is doing it via offsets. So I'm kind of curious who suddenly decided that offsets can be included in a net zero definition.
Explain offsets.
Oh man, I got a great analogy for you guys. It might get the show canceled. You ready to hear it?
Yeah.
5 years ago. So carbon offset is just this concept of like, if you have a certain amount of tons of CO2 that you can't get rid of yourself via energy efficiency or renewable energy,
or changing your business practice in some way. Yeah.
You can support a project somewhere else that has the effect you're looking for. So if you're trying to offset 30 tons of CO2 a year, you can go buy a piece of forest in Angola that's going to offset 30 tons of CO2 a year. Do you remember about 5 years ago, there was a Chinese guy who sued his wife after she gave birth to her kids because her kids were so ugly?
Yeah, I remember that.
You remember this story?
I do.
So first of all, the guy was awarded $120,000 by the Chinese government. This is crazy. And the reason that he sued her is she had so much plastic surgery done that he had no idea what she actually looked like. So he thought he was marrying this incredibly beautiful woman, and then she had kids, and he thought they were so ugly that he was going to sue his wife. That's the problem with offsets. You don't know what you're getting. The market is not mature enough. So my problem with offsets, with people claiming net zero on the back of offsets, you don't know what you're buying. And you can't sue people, I don't think yet, who are giving you shitty offsets.
You're a gold mine for this analogy. Didn't he have another analogy where he's talking about the constipation medicine from a Super Bowl commercial or something?
Owen was also recently sued by his wife for some of the same issues.
Yeah, so. I'm sure she should.
Our kids are so ugly, Owen.
You're not who I thought you were.
Oh, actually, now I feel bad. That wasn't meant to be a shot at your kids. It was supposed to be a shot at you, but now I feel bad.
My wife already hates you. Now she's going to hate you even more.
Great.
Well, this was supposed to be about net zero, so hopefully the analogy resonates. That was fun. But now let's jump into our conversation with Chad Nelsen. Chad Nelsen is the Chief Executive Officer of the Surfrider Foundation and leads the world's largest grassroots network dedicated to the protection and enjoyment of the world's oceans, waves, and beaches through approaches that integrate coastal recreation with conservation. He leads a dynamic and committed team that defends the coast against damaging projects, promotes ongoing coastal stewardship programs, advances protective ocean and coastal policies at all levels of government, while cultivating and developing community activists and leaders, and also help to establish the field of surfonomics, which applies natural resource economic approaches to value surfing. So, Chad, welcome to the Climate Rebels podcast.
Awesome. Thanks, guys, for having me.
All right, Chad, if you've listened to the show, you know we always start the guests off with the same question. We get right to work. How are you a climate rebel?
That is a good question. I think I'm a climate rebel because I'm really trying to get people to understand the impact of the ocean, which is often ignored, to the climate change challenge. And it's both been a savior to us, which we can talk about, and also really a potential solution.
Well, that's great stuff. Chad, I'm going to start us off here with a little bit of a Surfrider commercial, if you don't mind. I got my shirt on here, all for you.
I see that.
Yeah. So these guys might not know, and I'm going to criticize Owen here because I think he's not involved in the Surfrider Foundation as much as he should be. But for you guys, and Chad can tell us more about this, but Surfrider is this awesome ocean protection nonprofit, and it's got this cool model of handling it through decentralized activist network. So I got involved when I was in Los Angeles, started volunteering and met the coolest people, the most passionate people about ocean and environmental conservation, and became the vice chair of the Los Angeles chapter. That's about 5-7 years ago. And Chad, to this day, some of those people are lifelong friends. Some of the things we did, some of the programs we created are some of the proudest achievements of my professional career. I think anytime I find myself stymied by my profession, which is kind of maybe broadly considered sustainability, and you face a lot of barriers in this field, I try to harp back to the Surfrider time. It was like this beautiful moment in my life where everything was synergized, and volunteering with that chapter was just, again, some of the best moments of my life. So anyone who's out there and thinking about what nonprofit you might want to support and how you can get involved in protecting the ocean, Surfrider is a great place.
Joel, how do you know that I was not a part of Surfrider? I wasn't.
I guess I don't.
But
Let's
it's
hear it.
quite the assumption.
Well, Chad, the three of us, this podcast is about climate. It's about entrepreneurship. The three of us are working together on a real estate company that we're trying to attract people to invest in. So we like to joke with some of our friends too that are in the world of green building and sustainability and saying, you can't tell us you care until you invest in our company, Raven. I'm going to say to Owen, you can't tell me you care about the ocean until you start volunteering for the San Diego Surfrider chapter, and more appropriately, probably donating some money.
All right. I'll get to it. When I get back to San Diego, it'll be one of the first 3 things I do. You have my word.
All right. So we put him on the spot. He's on the record, Chad. So you got a new champion down there in San Diego.
You won't regret it.
I'm sure he won't. So Chad, let's dive in. Surfrider. I mean, I know there's lots of your career and your education we'd love to get to here, but let's give you the chance to tell us about Surfrider and how you got to where you are.
Yeah, sure. Also, Joel, I think your story is always like, it warms my heart to hear that, right? I always say people come for the impact, but they stick around for the community. And grassroots activism and volunteer activism can be challenging stuff to do. Sitting at a city council meeting for 2 hours waiting to give 3 minutes of testimony is not most people's idea of like a super fun Tuesday night. But if you're doing that with a group of people you care about, it becomes fun. So, it should be fun and meaningful and about the relationship. So
true.
I love
so
to
real.
hear that.
Yeah.
And that's really what we're all about, right? So we're a grassroots coastal and ocean conservation group. We've got 200 chapters and clubs across the U.S. These are volunteers in their communities trying to make a difference locally. Surfrider really provides a network to do that successfully, whether it's San Diego or Los Angeles or Coos Bay, Oregon, or Florida. But then we can really scale that impact up from the local level to the state level and ultimately up to the federal level. So it's decentralized in its activities and centralized in sort of its impact, which I think is the magic of the model. I didn't invent it. I came to Surfrider 25 years ago this August. But I've watched it work and I've become such a believer in it, and I was a grad student intern at Surfrider in 1995. So I'm also like a mailroom to the CEO kind of, and it took 25 long years, but no, I've been running it now too for about 9 years, which is amazing. I can't believe it's been that long, but I just continue to believe in it. I watch it work, and it's so fun and so satisfying that that's why I've stuck around for so long.
Well, Chad, we had a previous guest, a young woman named Carissa Cabrera, on the show. She's an ocean activist based in Hawaii. And we joked, Chris here, he lives in Omaha. And we talked about the idea of watersheds. And, you and I both know one of the programs I was part of founding and Surfrider was the One Watershed program in LA, where we try to take kids from disadvantaged communities surfing. And we had this perspective that we are all one watershed. If you care about the ocean, any place on earth is influencing, impacting, and potentially a solution to protect that ocean. So you just mentioned Oregon, Florida, LA, San Diego, but we try to remind Chris, we're waiting on him to start the Omaha Surfrider chapter.
Yeah. You can just fly me and some children out to the coast there to go surfing, and we can see what we can do.
No, you got to start it locally. That's the whole point. There's got to be some river in Omaha that connects to the Mississippi that drains into the Gulf.
Biggs.
There's definitely a river that gets to the ocean.
Here.
Totally. It all flows to the ocean eventually.
All right, Chris. So once I get involved in San Diego, you're launching Omaha's chapter. You got to get it on record.
All right, that's fair.
Well, Chad, I'd love to. Do you know about this wave in Munich? I've actually surfed it. Have you heard about this?
I have heard about it, and in fact, I'll get the name wrong, but there's like a national sort of like group, river surfing group, that's got maps, and there's river surfing all over. At least I know the Mountain West.
Yeah.
So Chris, you could surf. So there's some river in Omaha. I'm sure we can turn into a surf break.
Right.
But Chad, I'll send you the video of me surfing in Munich. I was there for work for Google, and I'd heard about this wave and just carved out time to go do it. It was pretty special.
You're not going to be
That's
impressed
awesome.
by the video.
Yeah, I didn't surf it well, but I was out there.
Isn't it hard, Joel?
It's
I
really
have
hard.
never.
I mean, it's a completely foreign concept. Entering the water, and like you get there, and they call it the Eisbach, which I think maybe stands for ice river. Super cold. I was even there in the spring when it shouldn't have been as cold as you'd think it was. But all these cool people there hanging out, and they were really nice. I rolled up. They were all in wetsuits. I had about 20 minutes, and I was wearing shorts, and people came up to me like, "Hey, dude, you can't just jump in here. Are you crazy?" And I was like, I'm from California. Like, I'm not a complete noob. Like, I know how to surf. And then they're really nice, and they showed it to me. But man, that water's humming. It's coming super fast. So like when you're getting in the point of I'm going to dive into this river right before this artificial reef they made that makes it jack up, it's not easy. It's intense.
Did you get up?
I kind of got up. I had 3 tries. On the 3rd try, you might call it surfing. So in the spirit of keeping it real here on the Climate Rebels podcast, I'll post the video on social media so everyone can make fun of me.
Love it.
Well, Chad, let's get back to climate rebelliousness here, but I think it's all related, right? I know you're on record saying surfing can save the planet. So before we get to that aspect, maybe I know surfonomics is something you're widely known for, and we're going to dive into that. But tell us about maybe more of the core message of the ocean's role in fighting the climate crisis.
Yeah, it's the ocean has played, I think, a couple important roles. One is it's really been buffering the heat trapping that's been going on with climate change. So, upwards of 70% of the carbon or the heat that we've, excess heat that we generated through climate change has been absorbed by the oceans. So our oceans are, without the ocean, we'd be living on an uninhabitable planet right now. It'd be too hot. And you see the heat waves we've seen these last couple weeks. We know how bad things are getting, and 30% of the carbon's been absorbed by the ocean too. The oceans are becoming more acidic as a result. But so on one hand, the ocean's really been saving us from the worst impacts of climate change to date. And then on the flip side, we're learning, they call it blue carbon, these ocean ecosystems, particularly the coastal ones, mangroves and wetlands, kelp, seagrasses, sequester an incredible amount of carbon, some say 5 to 10 times the rainforest. So restoring coastal habitats has all kinds of benefits, but one huge benefit is sequestering carbon, which is obviously something outside of stopping pumping so much out into the atmosphere. We also want to sequester as much as we can. So, I think one of our sort of more recent mantras is, save the ocean to save ourselves.
Chad, I've been seeing a lot of headlines recently about how warm the Atlantic is, specifically around Florida and the Caribbean, and how people are concerned that's going to drive really bad hurricane season. Is this just like a compounded cumulative effect of gradually warming oceans, and now we're like, well, this is really bad? Or is there something different about this year that's driving it?
There's the answer is both. We're now experiencing something called marine heat waves, which in my sort of 30 years of doing this work is a relatively like new term and new phenomenon. So about 4 or 5 years ago, off the west coast of the U.S., there was this big warm blob. They called it the blob, and we were seeing people catching bluefin tuna. We had in San Diego, they measured the water at like 78 degrees, warmest in 100 years, similar to what we're seeing now in Florida. And the oceanography community is realizing that these are now marine heat waves, which is all that heat that's been absorbed into the ocean kind of manifesting itself in these heat waves, the same way we see these heat domes in the atmosphere impacting the South and Texas these days. So that's something that's relatively new and a function of all this heat that's been absorbed. The other thing that's happening right now is we're after 3 or 4 years of a pretty strong La Nina cold water event, we're seeing an El Nino, and early indications are it could be a strong one. And so, and an El Nino means that the Eastern Pacific starts to warm. This warm water sloshes from sort of the east or from the west to the east, and it drives global temperatures. So I think we're going to see a lot of record-breaking temperatures. We've seen record-breaking temperatures under a cold sort of time. We're about to see a lot more heat in the next 18 months because of it. So it's those two things kind of in combination that are causing all the heat we're seeing.
And Chad, on top of that question, it's something I was looking forward to asking you. I know, as we discussed, Surfrider is a decentralized network of activists, and the people that volunteer are the best suited to address what's unique about their ecosystem, about their area of the coastline, so that Surfrider can really be dynamic in all these different places. And I know in Los Angeles, when I was there, plastic was such a challenge. We were so focused on the plastic problem on our beaches and in the ocean, and we're always focused on coastal access. And I know marine water quality is an issue, but like when we had Carissa amazingly works on so many different topics related to the ocean, but it all comes back to, if the climate continues to change at the rate we think it might, these acute impacts that we're trying to address through Surfrider and other ocean organizations are important, but they just get dwarfed by that overall message. So do you find it a challenge to say Surfrider is not a climate organization? That's not why it was started, but how does it not make that its primary focus?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, we now are a climate focused organization because you have to be, right? Like you said, it's the 600-pound gorilla in the room. And it turns out all the other issues that we work on are also related to climate change. So plastic is just solid fossil fuels, and we're learning more and more that the production of plastic, which is fossil fuel based, it's natural gas based, all the way to the use and the disposal is impacting the climate. Something like 20% of the carbon contributions coming from plastics. And the more plastic we generate, sort of the more climate impacts we're going to have. So plastic pollution is a climate issue. Harmful algal blooms and red tides and the impacts we're seeing from those are related to climate, because a warming ocean is going to cause more water quality problems. We're going to lose beach access. 50 to 70% of beaches in America are going to be threatened as a result of sea level rise. So you look at almost every single offshore drilling, you look at every single issue that we work on at Surfrider, and they're all climate related. And in fact, in last year, we established a new strategic plan at Surfrider, and basically that plan was like, hey, this is a ocean climate issue, and everything we're working on is connected to that. So the mission of Surfrider's kind of evolved as we've watched climate change become sort of the dominant issue of our times. So it wasn't what we were founded on 39 years ago, but it's now kind of how we're viewing all the work that we do.
And how was it founded?
Yeah, that's a great question. Surfrider was founded in 1984. by a handful of sort of visionary surfers in
That was
Malibu.
right?
Yeah, the name Surfrider, a lot of people think it's like the act of wave riding, but which it arguably could be, but it's really named after a place, Surfrider Beach, and even more specifically, Surfrider Hotel, where they were like signed the Articles of Incorporation. And back then, you know, Malibu was being impacted by tapia wastewater pollution coming out of Malibu Lagoon. So the break was chronically polluted. And then they'd managed the inlet there to Rivermouth without any consideration of its impact on surfing. And so, these surfers were like, hey, it's time for us to kind of take a stand on these issues that are impacting surfing. And prior to that, the reputation of surfers, which sadly still exists in some places, was like basically Spicoli, burnout, dropout, not contributing to society. And so these guys wanted to make a difference. And the other thing that influenced them, which I think is interesting, is 1984 was also the year of the LA Olympics. Uh, and these surfers were watching how the world looked at other athletes and other sports, sort of as like a symbol of all the good things that are happening in the world, and kind of wanted to change the reputation of surfing, which is interesting because now fast forward 40 years and surfing's in the Olympics, which I don't think folks would have ever guessed would have been the case in 1984. So that's sort of the founding story. And, they started making a difference in Malibu. And all of a sudden, surfers in other parts of the country and the world were like, hey, we want to do that too. And the organization couldn't keep up with the demand. And that's how the sort of chapter grassroots model started. They said, we can't help you in San Diego or in Humboldt, but we can share what we're doing. You can do it too. And we can build this network. So that's how the sort of grassroots orientation started.
Chad, I met Owen in graduate school at the Bren School of Environmental Science and Management at UC Santa Barbara, which I'm sure you know well. And I can attest he was and might still be a burnout who's not contributing to society. So he's not helping.
I have the same shoes as Spicoli.
Yeah. The checkered Vans, they've come back.
Yeah, exactly. They're in style again.
Well, Chad, I think that's a great segue, the way you talked about the surfer, the activist, and protecting what he, she loves and how powerful that is. I'd love to get to my question about kind of one of the things you're famous for in the ocean community and the sustainability community of your surfonomics. You got a PhD, valuing the wave, the break itself, and turning it into an economic story, and what that's done for your career and how that impacts the message of Surfrider. Again, I'll come back to Carissa when she was on. We talked about sea level rise, and I don't live in Santa Cruz anymore. I recently was in Santa Cruz, and I got to go on a boat tour with Save the Waves. Save the Waves? I'm sure you do, right? And they took me on this Jack O'Neill catamaran, and it was meant to talk to local Santa Cruz people who are concerned about the environment, to show them how the breaks were changing because of sea level rise already in Santa Cruz, where that city, that place is about surfing and nothing else in a lot of ways, and how what's that going to do to the culture and economics of Santa Cruz. And so I'll tee that up in a long question to ask. Tell us about surfonomics and tell us why it's so important.
Yeah, so surfonomics, is basically the study of the economics of surfing. And I was working on a project actually in Puerto Rico, trying to establish something called the Tres Palmas Marine Reserve in Rincon, Puerto Rico, which has great surf and really beautiful, healthy, and threatened coral reefs. And the goal was to build this marine protected area to protect these reefs, to protect the surf spot. And we were getting into the kind of classic age-old argument, which was economics versus the environment. So a lot of the local developers, tourist operations were opposed to conservation because they thought it was going to limit their economic opportunity. We brought in an economist named Linwood Pendleton, who's a pretty well-known. He was at UCLA. He worked at NOAA. Now he's at a university in France, and had him do kind of this rapid economic assessment of this little town, Rincon. And not surprisingly, the majority of the people who were there to surf, to snorkel, to dive, to fish, to hang out at the beach. And so we made a pretty simple case that Rincon economics are driven by ocean recreation and surfing. So protecting that is actually what's going to ultimately be good for business. And this little report that we wrote like 20 years ago was a game changer. All of a sudden, the whole perspective of sort of the pro-business, pro-tourism, pro-development community, like the light went on for them. And so I saw that and said, okay, that's a powerful tool. Linwood, the guy who did the report, recruited me to UCLA to do my doctoral thesis on surfonomics. Hadn't been coined at the time. So as all research projects do, you start by looking at the literature and see what's out there. And there's nothing. So, we've valued the Appalachian Trail, whale watching, even beach going, but no one had looked at the economics of surfing. Meanwhile, we know, like you said, Santa Cruz, Surf City, my town, Laguna Beach, built on surfing, San Diego. So I was like, okay, I'll apply basic natural resource economics tools to surfing. And no one had really done that before. So I started looking at trestles, world-class surf spot that happened to also be threatened by a big toll road project. And Surfrider had a big Save Trestles campaign. Surveyed about 1,300 surfers showing up at trestles. And, they came from all over the place, from San Diego to Santa Barbara in the summers, particularly. 3,000 surfers a day. That's why it's crowded there. And guess what? When they come to San Clemente, they stop at the surf shop. They buy gas. They go to the restaurants. Some of them stay over. So quantifying that impact, and it turns out that like 8 to 13 million bucks a year was being pumped into the city of San Clemente by surfers visiting trestles alone. And so that sharing that information with the town had the same effect it did in Rincon. Local elected officials, tourism board, chamber, they were blown away. They had no idea that they had this sort of gem in their backyard that was driving such a big part of their economy. And it really changed a lot of minds about sort of the value of surfing to the city. And now that concept's been, Save the Waves does a bunch of work with it around the globe. And so that idea that surfers are an important part of the, ocean recreation tourism economy, which is sort of obvious, but just hadn't ever been quantified, is now becoming a much more understandable concept. And all you got to do is keep the ocean, beaches, and waves healthy, and that economic engine will continue to run sort of in perpetuity.
Do they, when they're doing those tests or those studies, are they factoring in beachgoers as well? Because you said that it's obvious. I'll be honest, I'm somewhat surprised by this, and I'm happy to hear it's a great result in a study to know that Trestle's study helped save perhaps that passway. I never would have guessed that. So I'm curious, what are they all factoring into this study when they determine what kind of economics they're bringing? Is it beachgoers? Is it what's all included in that?
So there's a guy named Phil King up at San Francisco State University who's kind of like the god of sort of beachonomics, I guess, and beach going. So it's been more, people have been measuring beach going for a lot longer. And I guess that was sort of obvious that the beachgoers, were doing the same thing. The thing about the surfers, which is interesting, is they tend to be more year round, less seasonal. So that, if you go down to the surf spot in February, usually the beach is empty. And if the waves are good, the water's, full. So that was one part of it. The surfers actually use the beach during different times of the day. They tend to be earlier and later. The beachgoers go in the middle. So all the historical studies that looked at beach going, they'd go out at noon because that was like peak beach, visitation time. It's actually oftentimes the lowest point for surfing because they want to get there in the morning, either before work or when the wind's good. Or
surfers work.
Yeah,
some of them.
Well, that was another part of it that was funny is I looked at the demographics of the surfers going to trestles, and not too surprisingly, they're kind of reflective of the communities they live in. If you live in San Diego or Santa Barbara or Laguna Beach or Encinitas or San Clemente, you're probably pretty well off because the rents are expensive. So, I found that these surfers were highly educated, had good salaries. Most of them were working full time. So I was trying to change the image, or I characterize surfers. They're a lot more like runners than of course there's the lifestyle surfers who change everything in their lives to just surf, but they're actually the minority, not the majority.
I was surprised to learn that when I lived in Hawaii. It was in Honolulu, so I don't know how that compares to a lot of the places you've been speaking about. But I lived there for 2 years, and my wife, she actually worked at a law office there. The majority of the attorneys before work would be out on the water. Like, growing up in the Midwest, I had no idea that these attorneys would be in there swimming around surfing. It's quite surprising to a lot of people. And although it may seem obvious to you, it was really neat to see for me because it made it so much more of a gathering and a sport and a fun activity for everybody.
That's right. These guys are up at dawn. That's the other thing. Like, surfers are lazy, right? That's the reputation. Like, you can be down at Trussell's at 5:15 a.m.
and you're late.
Yeah, and you're watching dozens of people streaming to the beach. That means they got up at 4:30. They surf for an hour and a half, change in their car, and then they're off to work. So not only is surfing, anyone who's learned to surf knows it's physically difficult and you get beat up, so it's not easy. But also these surfers are pretty dedicated, motivated folks.
I used to surf when I first moved to LA, and I worked downtown, had a corporate job, was in a cube wearing a suit. I'd be in these stupid meetings with people bickering about corporate politics stuff. And I had surfed that morning, El Porto or something, Chad. LA, El Porto can get pretty intense. And I remember sitting in these meetings sometime, I was 24, thinking, all you assholes here, you think this is tough or important. I was out getting my ass kicked a couple hours ago in the Pacific.
Exactly. Closeouts at El Porto.
Oh, yeah. I learned basically to surf at El Porto. And it's this guy that was sort of one of my mentors in surfing. He grew up in Redondo. He always told me, if you can learn to surf here, you'll be able to surf anywhere. Well, let's pivot a bit, Chad. So much we can learn from you beyond surfonomics, beyond your CEO role. I mean, I think just this podcast is called the Climate Rebels Podcast, and it's kind of real estate, it's kind of climate, sustainability focus, but we want to celebrate doers, disruptors. So when someone like you comes on, we want to think not just about we want our audience to get a different perspective, which you're giving. But I know that you think about this so differently. Running an organization like Surfrider is very entrepreneurial. I'm sure. I know it is, even as being one of the chapter members. But how do you think about the tools and the people? I think in our pre-show notes, you wanted to talk about this concept of builders versus behaviorists. And I think I don't know exactly what you're going to say, so I'll let you say it here in a second. But I think there's so much to learn from what you're saying from a NGO perspective, but probably applies to lots of industries and lots of professional walks of life. So maybe you can tell us more about it.
That's right. I mean, Surfrider is a nonprofit organization, and I think a lot of people think that means you're not running a business, but you really are. It just means the only difference really is that if we make a profit, it doesn't sort of go to shareholders or to the company. You reinvest it in the mission. But I have an annual budget. I've got staff. I'm fundraising. I've got P&L sheets. All the usual stuff that a business would have. The product we produce, I would argue, is clean water and healthy beaches. So the investors, which are our donors, don't really get a dividend financially, but hopefully their dividend is a great day at the beach. So in a lot of regards, it's sort of the same. And there's also this concept of the social entrepreneur, right? I wake up trying to think about how to get people like Owen engaged in our work. And drive engagement. So we're problem solving how to get more people involved, which is customers. We're trying to figure out what the product is, which is our programs and our advocacy that we can sell to our investors and to get our customers to adopt. And then we think about our output and our income and, as our profit as sort of these environmental outcomes. So, I think that there's a lot more parallels than people realize. And thinking about your podcast, back to the builders and behaviorists, I do think I saw this amazing talk by a business professor at University of Michigan. He taught at the business school and the environment school. And he talked about the mindset of sort of entrepreneurs and the mindset of environmentalists, and how they often kind of have a different worldview, back to this kind of like environment versus the economy thing. And I kind of synthesized what he said into this concept of the builders versus the behaviorists. And I think it's a way of linking kind of probably your more typical audience member or person you interview who's trying to innovate and build new technology to solve climate change, or like your company is doing. And I think environmentalists tend to be what I call behaviorists. They're trying to change behavior. And they could be doing that by saying, hey, skip the single-use plastics at your house or at your coffee, individual behavior. But if you think about it, like we're trying to pass laws and policies, and ultimately those shift behavior too. On the other side, entrepreneurs usually are trying to build solutions to the problems. So they're trying to change behavior by changing sort of technology. And a good example of this would be like if you look at the car industry. So we're trying to reduce carbon pollution from cars. So on one hand, you have like the Elon Musk's and Teslas of the world who are like, let's build a better car so that people drive an electric car, and that can be part of the solution. The behaviorists would say, hey, let's increase the CAFE standards and set standards so every car's got to get 50 miles to the gallon. And I think one of the other sort of false choices is that those are sort of dueling sort of mind views, but they're actually, I think they're synergistic, right? A lot of technology changes behavior, which is really good. And a lot of regulation and rules spur innovation. And the government can also function in supplying capital, right? And so I think that part of it is that there's a false choice. You got to be one or the other. And I think they're really synchronous. And so, I say that because I think the environmental community and the business community, when they work together, can get a lot more done. But you often see these two worlds clashing. Don't tell us what to do. We'll figure it out ourselves. And the environmentalists are like, you'll never figure it out yourself. We're going to tell you what to do. But if we can get those things aligned, which is, I hope, what like IRA is going to do, the Inflation Reduction Act is going to kind of combine those two things and spur a bunch of innovation, while also having rules to make sure we don't cook.
Well, Owen, you've said this a few times on this show, exactly what he described as this false choice, as being something that is creating friction amongst groups that actually have shared goals.
That's right. And there's many ways to get at these problems. And frankly, I think we need them all.
It's interesting because we keep hearing, like, of the guests we bring on the show, we keep hearing sort of the same pattern that there's going to be this period of transition and we're going to need a lot of different solutions. And it's not just one thing, and it's not getting off carbon, instantaneously, like flipping a switch or snapping your fingers. But for some reason, the general public, like the headlines, what you hear, you get these sides going back and forth because it sounds like people that support climate change are saying we got to get off carbon like now, instantly, altogether. And then the people that are sort of anti that say, well, that's not possible. You can't just make the transition overnight. I feel like, this comes up on so many podcasts. We got to figure out a way to get this message out that it's going to be a transition. It's not just going to happen overnight. We need a lot of solutions. We need people working together, because it just seems like that message is not resonating for some reason.
I call it somewhat of like you need to have like an anxious patience.
Yeah.
I think you really need to get going, but understand it's not going to happen overnight. I think it's really important for everybody to understand.
Yeah. And Joel and I always talk about how you got to get going before anything's perfect. Like if you wait for the perfect solution, you will never get started. You just got to go.
That's how my wife found me. She just had to settle right away and try to make me perfect,
Yeah, he's good enough.
Yeah, exactly. I know. And I think you're right. And I think also the speed at which things happen and change is accelerating generally. So I think if you get the right kind of like enabling conditions, I think we'll be pleasantly surprised by how quick innovation occurs. And I also like equate it, it's funny because if you look at like the telecom world, right, we went from like smoke signals to landlines, to Morse code, to landlines. Now we have this amazing little computer in your pocket that you can like talk to anybody on the planet. And if you look at how we power the world, like we're still burning shit. We went from like wood to coal to whale oil to natural gas, and the innovation just hasn't been anywhere sort of the same as it has been with like technology, other technologies like telecom. And so I think that's switching really fast, right? Like all these renewable energies are now the cheapest form of energy available. And so, I do think we're at this cusp where we're just going to watch change happen really fast, which frankly is exciting, and why you guys are doing what you're doing and why you're having this podcast. So,
Well, Chad, let me ask you. I love this. This is like a personal question because it's just a personal fascination of mine. As our company, we're trying to raise money from lots of people, and we had this thesis that there's thousands of people in this country who are frustrated with climate inaction. So once they find out they can make money with us, investing with us as part of a climate solution, it's going to be a slam dunk. And look, turns out it's kind of hard to do a mass marketing campaign like we're trying to do. But I also, in my career in climate, you find it's hard. This message, it's not like biodiversity. It's not like water conservation, these things that are very tangible. We're talking about an invisible gas in the atmosphere. And yeah, people have heard about it and know climate's an issue, but it's not really, it's a tough sell in a way. And I'm asking you because, as you described, Surfrider's considering itself, evolving, new strategic plan. We have to be a climate organization. That's the biggest impact on the ocean. But that's probably harder to sell to your donors. I wonder if you get pushback. It's like, it's not as sexy as protecting the surf break or solving plastic pollution, which is right in people's face when they get to the beach. So I guess, you said you're a business owner and fundraising is your revenue. What are you hearing from your donors? What are you seeing in the ways people are committing to the cause? Are you concerned that a climate focused message might derail your brand a little bit around the sexiness of protecting the ocean?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and I think we have kind of this breadcrumb strategy, right? Like our like number one volunteer activity is beach cleanups. And so we're still out there picking up trash on the beach, even though we know that that's not going to solve the plastic pollution problem in the ocean. Ultimately, you just can't beach clean your way up out of it, but what it does is it gives us an opportunity to, if you go to the beach and do a beach cleanup, you kind of never look at plastic the same again. So we're like shifting the mind orientation. And then if people become obsessed with plastic, which seems to be easy to do because you see it in your everyday life, like you're saying, it's not abstract. That gives us an opportunity to be like, hey, do you know that that's basically like, plastic pollution is basically a fossil fuel and a climate issue. So we try to connect like showing up at a beach cleanup on a Saturday morning, and bring someone along the path to get them to climate. And if you want to stop anywhere along that path, that's okay. So I think that's how we're trying to do it. I also think, in the last couple months you've seen this, is that, I can't remember the exact number, but something like 70% of Americans have felt some impact of climate change. And 5 years ago, there'd be some weather phenomenon. They'd be like, oh, I don't know if it's climate change related or not. It's just a hot day. And now you're hearing unequivocally, like this is happening because of climate change. So I think that it's becoming less abstract, which is alarming, because, we're starting to feel some really pretty serious impacts. The U.S. Forest Service is, basically a fire management agency now, not a forest agency, so that you're seeing those shifts too. And you look at their budget, it's like 70% fire. It used to be 20% fire. So you're starting to see these changes occur in ways that I think that sell is going to be, easier and easier. And I think the other thing is, and I imagine you guys are feeling this, is that it's such a big issue. It's pretty abstract, and it's easy to say, there's nothing I can do about this. It's too big for me or any one person. And so that's one of the reasons why I think like your concept is really great is you're giving people sort of a bite size way to have an impact. And even from a policy perspective, which I know, Joel, you did, it's like, greening an entire sector like housing is daunting also, and it requires big government initiatives and millions or billions of dollars. But you've also said, hey, we can break this into little chunks and do it incrementally. So
It's making it tangible or easy to understand, like you gave the analogy of plastic. And so I say the same thing for our company, Raven, is that it's daunting to think about decarbonizing an entire planet.
Yep.
But if you can give an investor something tangible to understand, like making money on their investment and knowing it's going to decarbonize the planet, it makes that avenue or that traffic to the decarbonization, if not easier to understand, at least much more rewarding and something to settle on, as opposed to decarbonizing a planet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a friend who has an investment fund in organic agriculture. He's basically doing the same thing, right? It's more profitable to grow organic almonds than it is conventional almonds. There's like a valley of death if you're a farmer to get from one to the other, even though you can sell them for like 4 times more. So his model is the same as yours. Let's invest capital in these farmers, help them transition, and then the investors will take a piece of that profitability in the future. Like, a more efficient home, it saves a lot of money. And it's just, so that's another thing I really love. A lot of these climate strategies are just better, right? They're more efficient, they're more profitable. It's the transition that's the tough part. And that's something else you guys are really, helping do, which is great, to find a way to give everyone access to being part of that transition.
Very cool. Well, really proud of this segment. We connected the dots between beach cleanups and investing in clean energy real estate. I think it was tied together pretty well there, and it's just true. And it's like this across the sector, all these different industries that we're trying to decarbonize. I'm sure there's examples in every one of them like this. You get started, you get people involved, you make it tangible, and you build new movements and communities, and that's how major change happens eventually. Well, Chad, we're kind of running out of time. I know you run an organization that's about hope and optimism, so this question will be easy for you. Here at the Climate Rebels podcast, we try not to harp on the naysayers and the doomsdayers, and the bad news about the planet, as we just alluded to a little bit, is alarming, but we try to bring it back to hope and optimism and solutions. So what gives you hope about the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think I'm convinced that everyone who's an environmentalist is an optimist, because you believe that change is possible. So, I'm certainly an optimist, and I'm optimistic because we have all the solutions that we need to solve the climate problem, the ocean pollution problem, all these issues. So I'm like, this is possible. It's just a matter of getting enough people to get behind those solutions, as an individual, from a business standpoint, and politically. And so I see my job is actually, not solving the problem. It's really getting more people involved in the solutions that exist. And so, I think they're overwhelming and they're urgent, but they're all doable. So if we can build enough big enough movement, get enough people engaged, which I think is happening, there's no problem that we can't solve. And we're going to ultimately live in a cleaner, healthier, more abundant planet and society, which sounds pretty good to me.
Sounds great to me. Well, we're gonna wrap up here, but we had an idea before you jumped on. Owen and I were trying to figure out who's the better surfer. And so we decided we're going to have a surf off. So if you want to have a Surfrider sponsored Climate Rebels surf off, we know where to find you.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm in.
All right. We got to set it up.
Well, Chad, thanks so much for taking the time. Thank you for everything you do. In all sincerity, you're one of the people I look up to the most in the environmental community. Surfrider is this amazing place I can't speak highly enough of. And your tenure's been pretty special. So keep it up. We're all rooting for you.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me on the podcast. And I feel the same about what you guys are doing. It's exciting to see sort of, entrepreneurs like yourselves, like getting into the climate space, finding a unique niche and building something special. So a privilege to be on Climate Rebels with you guys.
Thank you. Thanks for having
Thanks,
me on.
Chad.
Well, Chad, before we wrap up completely, let's make sure our audience knows how to find you. Tell us, you're active on Twitter. Surfrider is active in a lot of places, but you tell the audience.
Yeah, I mean, we also, one of our goals right now is to create 1 million friends of the ocean, towards that idea of building momentum towards these actions. So we're encouraging people to join Surfrider. It's $5 a year. Volunteer at your local chapter. Subscribe to our newsletters. And you can find that all on surfrider.org, or look at Surfrider and any of your social channels.
I mean, one last plug I'll say about my story is how it's very open-ended. Like, I went to Surfrider, I went to the meetings. I was like in the back, like a lot of people, like, I don't know how I'm going to get involved here. I see this executive committee, they're working on lots of cool stuff. And I went up to Graham, who's a mutual friend of ours. He was running the chapter at the time. I said, I want to see, like, is there anyone working on something in LA where we're trying to take kids from the inner cities areas that don't typically get to the coast and take them surfing? Like, could we do that? And he was like, you're in charge of that now. So it was like this entrepreneurial opportunity. I was like, I just, all of a sudden I was in charge of it. And you go there with an idea and they're like, yeah, please do it. We're aligned. As long as it's aligned with the mission of Surfrider, you are now in charge of it. And we created this amazing program, something I'm incredibly proud of. And then to your point about some of what might seem not so sexy about volunteering at a city council meeting for 3 hours a night. I've done that with Surfrider. Going to a beach cleanup, it can be fun. You're at the beach, but you're picking up trash. It's not the most ideal thing you might do with your time. But the rewards of Surfrider, especially in LA, like when I was there, we got to go to these awesome Malibu parties where you're hanging out with Kelly Slater and Hollywood actresses. And it's like, I'm there just hanging out because I volunteered. So I'm sure you'll agree. Another reason to volunteer.
Totally. Tons of perks, right? You do the hard work, but you meet amazing people. You build an incredible community. We have people who bounce around the country for jobs, and they can connect with a Surfrider chapter in New York City or Portland, Oregon, or San Francisco. So it's a network. There's a local person to take you surfing anywhere in the country. It's a hidden benefit of the organization. And you ultimately participate in some meaningful change, which feels really good. So yeah, we want to make volunteering fun and meaningful, and that's what keeps people engaged and involved.
No doubt. Okay, so we'll wrap it up there. Thank you to the audience, everyone, for joining. You can find us on most of the social media platforms at Join Raven. So that's Join, and Raven is with a Y, RAYVEN. You can find this podcast and more great content at joinraven.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe, like, and share with your friends. And until next time, we encourage you to ask yourself, what are you doing to fight the climate crisis?